I'll tell you the one I'm proudest of, and it culminated in an article published in 2004 called The Denial of Slavery in Management Studies. And that was an account of the extent to which everyday practices of management and a class and cadre of people known as managers who emerged in the modern world first emerged not as we traditionally think in heavy industry, but in the management of slaves in North America, particularly in the United States, from about 1800 to 1861. So the data I used was primarily secondary sources, but I used data and sources from outside management, from history, which gave accounts of how these processes of making these people work were organized, and saw in there and described how in there they contain within them what we now call management.
I did some work a while ago looking at historical work, looking at the way in which groups that hold religious beliefs have influenced managerial issues, and this focused on the way in which a group of people called the Industrial Mission, who are priests of various denominations, had gone into workplaces, gone into organisations, and been active, but not in seeking to evangelise, instead seeking to empathise with the experience of industrial work. This was post-war, and I did oral history interviews with these priests and ministers about their experience of having gone into difficult work situations, for example into mining contexts, into coal mining, and also about their experience of industrial disputes, including the 1980s UK coal miners' strike, which is a pivotal moment in the history of industrial relations in the UK, and in terms of Thatcherite politics. And I felt that it was important work in the sense that these people were invisible. They had not told their story, and the role that they played hadn't been heard, and the way in which they'd connected to these issues hadn't been told as a story.
The last book I did was on representations of pirates and outlaws and criminals, and most of that's based on kind of historical sources, but also on contemporary media presentations. And what I was really interested in looking at there is our fascination with criminals, with outlaws and bandits and pirates and highwaymen and all those kinds of figures who are now, you know, absolutely the staple of the Hollywood film industry, right the way back, well, over a century. And it seemed to me that that tells us something quite interesting about the popular suspicion that people have of orthodox work organisations, because very often these bandits and outlaws and cowboys and so on are represented as somehow being more authentic, of not working for the man, of living a life which is somehow freer, more dangerous, more interesting than the kind of workaday worlds that we live in. But in terms of my methods, well, really, I suppose I'm doing the kind of work that somebody in cultural studies or media studies might do, although not nearly as well as they probably do it.
Well, one of my areas of interest is looking at ageing, so how people grow older in organisations, and more importantly how they feel about growing older, and how that helps them make sense of their everyday experience of work. So one of the studies I was involved in was going into a hedge fund, which is a financial in the financial services, and looking at how everyday interactions that people have contribute to how people make sense of the process of growing older. So we paid attention, we did interviews with people, so we asked them particularly about how they felt about growing older, but more importantly, what we were interested in was the little interactions, the informal interactions that people would have, for example, as they're making coffee, or if they're going for a break, or even going to the toilet and catching people in the corridors and having those small chats. And in those small chats, what we were interested in were the little processes of interaction that people had with each other that helped them make sense of where they were situated in terms of how they were younger or older in a company.
It's a small company in Wales, and we went to that company for 3 days, I think, if I remember correctly. And we interviewed people, we hung around, we made notes, we made observations, we took some photographs. We analysed the data in an interpretive way, so that was the key approach. And then through our reading of the data, we made a couple of arguments about the nature of work in this organisation, because the organisation represents itself as a kind of anti-capitalist organisation, which is why we became interested in it. And we analysed the data to make a case that the nature of work within this organisation wasn't radically different to what you would find in a conventional organisation.
I've been working with market resistance, and I've been dealing with a lot of qualitative data interpreted methods, and mainly with critical discourse analysis. And now I am prepared to dive into and working a little bit with decolonizing stuff. And it's the beginning of a work, but we are trying to understand how epistemic domination works with management knowledge.
So this was a piece of visual research looking at the ways that CEOs and business leaders are photographed and depicted in the business press. And we collected, we picked one particular magazine, the best-selling business magazine in Australia, the nation where I work, and we collected images of all business leaders over 2 6-month periods, so 800 odd images. And then we analysed what these photographs of these leaders conveyed in terms of, if you compare them to the history of portraiture, if you compare the depictions of the powerful throughout history, and what sort of iconography and status symbols and everything else is linked together with the subject when they're depicted, and how that differs or compares with contemporary depictions of business leaders. And so what you're doing with a piece of work like that is you're trying to take something which is often seen as banal, taken for granted. We just skim over these pictures, and you're trying to really interrogate its roots and its causes, and kind of make to tease out the politics which is often hidden in these things.
So we are interested in how people who are given the task of being leaders work on their appearance. Is appearance important to them? So we start off, it's qualitative research, interview-based. We start off by a life history section to the interview, so we have the context for people's present careers. Then we move on, we've adapted repertory grid techniques, because RepGrid enables people to grasp abstract concepts in ways that are difficult with just a cold question. So we ask them, we do a typical RepGrid type interview, but we record it, which is not typical. And then after that, we offer them a series of photographs torn out of magazines and newspapers, and use a RepGrid technique to ask them to identify, it mimics the middle stage of the interview. From the photos, identify 2 people who look like ideal leaders, 2 people who look like average leaders, and 2 people who look like mediocre leaders. And we ask them to give us their ideas of why these people look, why their looks influence whether they are good, bad, or indifferent leaders. And we ask them to imagine a conversation they might have with the people that they've chosen. And most people can immediately jump into an imagined conversation with these imaginary leaders, which is fascinating.